Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good to see some smiling faces. I imagine it's been a long day for everybody already, so rest those feet, take the opportunity, Okay, cool. So we're going to get started. And today I'm talking about adaptive learning, but specifically how a skills-based approach can impact your business. And I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey. When I was preparing this presentation, I was thinking a little bit about some personal context and how we can actually do that. So, first of all, this is me. My name's Chris. I'm the CRO at my skill camp. And I've been in and around the HR technology space now for about 15 or 16 years, working around talent acquisition through the HR space, the engagement and experience space, and learning. And it's been wonderful to see the different synergies as those worlds collide and start to really deliver a lot of the same outcomes, which is great experiences for employees and ultimately retaining and growing our best talent. So, I started thinking about how do we talk about skills in a time where skills are so up in the air, everything's changing so quickly. So I thought I'd talk about a bit of a skills revolution. So, who am I? Or who was I, shall we say? So, I was a commuter. We're going back 3 years. I was a guy in a suit, flying around, selling stuff. It was good fun. And I was a dad. And those are my 3 key skills. I loved it. I'm very proud of it. But actually, fundamentally, everything changed. Because when you start to think about actually, what did I become? I actually became a chef. I actually became a teacher, sitting there trying to get a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old to school every single day. I became a middle-aged man in Lycra on my bicycle. I became a negotiator. Trying to get 2 kids of 2 years apart to speak to each other in a reasonable way is frankly almost impossible, as I discovered. And I came to appreciate the world around me. But actually, what does that mean? Each one of these things was a skill I didn't have 2.5 years ago. I didn't have a clue how to look at some ingredients and make some food, and clearly, actually, I think I'm enjoying it a little bit too much nowadays. I didn't know how to deal with my kids in contentious situations and when there's no logic to some of these arguments. And I certainly didn't know how to retain someone's attention and engage them and try and teach them. These were skills that became the foundation of what I did every single day. Now, that led me to an expectation. When I wasn't doing any of those things, what did I need? I wanted personalization. So you think about the way that we all consume everything around us today, from what you look at on your mobile phones, to your watch, to your car, to the things you watch and engage with online. You know, be that Netflix, be that Amazon. All of these things are recommending things to you based upon what you did last, or what your preferences are based on what you show that you do. So this became an expectation. It blossomed into the way we consume music and further content. And then lastly, it also impacted us in the retail world. And yes, that really says a lot about my life, doesn't it? When there's worming tablets, makeup, and hay fever medication in my Amazon recommendations. Fundamentally, this became the expectation of everything I consumed in my life, alongside with those skills which were changing and evolving so quickly. So then, I had this realization, probably only about 3 weeks ago. All change again. So I don't know if any of you have seen these kind of posts, but I started to see all these photos. LinkedIn was full of, it's great to be back at the office. It's great to be seeing people. You know, we started to think, oh, we're going back to normality. And I started to think about, okay, so are we going to go back to work with the same skills? A little bit of an evolution, but fundamentally the same skills that we left the office with 2.5 years ago. But actually, then I read a really interesting article on Harvard Business Review. It makes me sound all intelligent when I say that, doesn't it? I did. But it was really interesting. It was called The Rise of the Corporate Nomad. The evolution that actually, yes, fine, we all sit here assuming that everyone wants personalization. But actually, people want personalization that's relevant in a world which has fundamentally changed. Our expectations have changed of work, of how it has to react and evolve to us. So if you think about the way that this person learns, the way that person learns, a simple recommendation that says, this is next, that isn't going to work for both those people. They're very different. And the only way I could summarize this to you was recommendation 0, adaptation 1. We need to change from just recommending something 1 + 2 means you do 3. But actually, what about if 1 + 2, you struggled with 2, so actually go to 1.5 and then go to 4. It's about adapting to the individual, adapting to the environment and the skills that those people have. And that's where we arrive at the concept of adaptive learning. So firstly, how does this apply to the learning space? So as a lovely, simple definition for you, personalized learning experiences address the unique needs of a learner through ongoing feedback, learner paths, and resources. Really thinking about those experiences that we've all had over the last few years has fundamentally changed the way that we expect that content to be recommended, but critically that we need diverse, rich content that keeps us engaged throughout. Now, how do I validate those statements? So we did some research, we went out to the markets, we looked at the experiences we have today. So 74% of consumers get frustrated when they receive content that isn't personalized. So we really are getting frustrated if we just get the generic, you need to do 1 + 2 + 3 + 4. Personalized emails, something that we all despise, right? Everyone gets tons and tons of emails, but actually there's some really interesting behavioral statistics that come off the back of this. 29% higher open rates if that email is personalized to me. 41% higher click rates. People are engaging with it. And 6 times higher revenues come from those emails. So you say, well, how is that relevant to learning? Think about what this means. This is fundamentally the process of how you engage someone, how you retain someone, and how you drive action from it. Doesn't matter this is a commercial context, the premise and the principles remain the same. And then 78% of learners want recommendations based on their career goals and their skill gaps. So you start to think of this as a really strong body of evidence with which we need to build and focus the way we go to market. But most importantly, it shows the real relevance of personalization. And personalization in the learning space needs to be more focused on skills and less based on just a generic list of competencies. So, what is a skill-based approach? Now, what's been really interesting as you go around the event today, there's lots of different takes on skills, lots of different takes on where that comes from and where it's going to take us. But we have a fundamental sort of 5-step process I'd love you all to think about when it comes to skills. The first piece is around organizational skill gaps. What can we what can be upskilled versus reskilled? I think this is a really interesting concept in terms of when you think about clarifying and verifying what you have in front of you today and focusing on those critical scenarios. I think we've come from a background of a kind of everyone needs the same content and we're just trying to drive people in the same direction. But actually that personalization and that evolution to adaptation means we need to have a much better understanding of the upskilling versus the reskilling. So fundamentally, what is that difference and where do we invest our time and money? Curation. Identifying rich and diverse materials from existing and new content. We've seen a real lack of tolerance for poor quality content in the market. At my skill camp, we are one of our specialties is a content marketplace. We provide and aggregate content from a lot of the big providers you see around you today. But actually what we've seen is people get really frustrated if organizations are prescribing content in a very linear fashion and it's typically all from one source. They want variety. They want engaging content from different sources that provide rich, diverse perspectives on that learning path. And curation is critical to that journey. A baseline. Now, I come from a background over the last few years of looking at the employee experience. Baselines and benchmarks are everything. How do we understand where we are today and how do we make sure that we're working towards the right things in the future? We need to baseline our understanding of the organization. This also gives you a fantastic way to make sure that you're investing in the right thing. One of the critical things that I've seen time and time again has been a real challenge in terms of understanding how do we prove the return on investment in the learning space. If we have a baseline, we can measure incremental improvement over time in the growth of skills, in the growth of learning. Then we can start to prove the impact of our investments. Personalization. Then it's about adaptation. So how do we bring that depth of content to give that personalized experience and driving and adapting the right skills for the organization, but the right skills for the individual? There's a real lack of tolerance now in individuals to just come to work and do the same thing. I showed at the beginning with those photos as kind of my own evolution in my skill set, some of which are, to the good, some less. But fundamentally, my expectations of what I need from my employer have completely shifted as a result. And we need to show an adaptation and respect to the skills in question. And then measurement. How do we quantify the impact of that learning experience? So in terms of the measurement of skills growth, we need to have that baseline to be able to understand where we're starting from. And then we can help you start to build and understand the impact and project forwards what we think that impact could be, and then validate that at the end in a measurement, in a return on investment statement, as it were. So, skill-based business impact is what we really want to help you achieve in the market today. So, how did we do this? What did we do? We took a very, very simple and powerful approach to this. We worked with 3 substantial organizations. They're all very French, as you can probably see from the logos below. So SNCF, that's the big train infrastructure in France. Bouygues Telecoms organization, and IFCAM, which is part of Crédit Agricole, the banking space. Now, we work with them because they're quite mature organizations. They're very focused on not making rash investments into learning and HR technology as a whole. So what we did is we worked with them to identify in each company 2 different learner groups. Those 2 different learner groups, one group were going to be given an adaptive learning pathway. And I'll explain what that is in a second. The second learner group, we're going to get a much more traditional, prescribed learning journey, as you might expect. So, what I mean by prescribed learning journey, it was a set of courses that you started at the beginning, you went to the end, and the expectation was by the time you reached the end, you had grown your skill set to a certain degree, got a rubber stamp, and on you go. An adaptive learning pathway is the scenario whereby you take a diagnostic assessment. As I said on the previous slide, that diagnostic assessment is doing 2 things. It's a diagnostic which is built around the skills, specifically the skills that are relevant for that user group. That diagnostic gives you your baseline to understand what is the current status or understanding and skill set that individual has. An adaptive learning pathway then uses that to then build a personalized learning journey, which is full of different types of content. So the really important thing here is we're combining everything I just spoke about. We're talking about it's highly adaptive to the individual. It's rich and diverse in content. But most importantly, what it also does is at each step of the learning pathway, it's saying, okay, well, actually, Chris, you really struggled here, so we're going to throttle back slightly and give you a different type of content, and then we'll bring you back to where you were previously. That's the critical part of adaptation. And it concludes with a set of skills where you take another assessment at the end to validate. And then the critical eureka moment is that ability to then say, okay, well, the skills as an individual, as a team, as a business, started here, they finished here. What is the growth that we have achieved for the investment in that particular platform? So that's the principle of adaptive learning. So how is this relevant and what is the impact? That's what you're here to hear. So first, really, really powerful stat. And maybe I'll come over this side to liven it up a little bit. So time optimization, 37% saved in terms of achieving the desired learning outcomes. If you think about the way you consume content, if you're forced to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it can become a pretty monotonous and soul-destroying process, whereas adaptation allows you to effectively focus upon those areas where you have the greatest impact, addressing the skills deficit you have where you need it. 76% of learners still active 3 months after the initial training, because there is that fundamentally increased level of engagement with the content. It's meaningful, it's digestible, and it's something that you can then leverage in the workplace. 49% fewer failures in post-learning examinations. You think about the impact of that from a cost perspective. Well, actually not even cost, risk. Think about that if you're in a compliance-based organization, the confidence you can have that your individuals are less likely to fail. It's a huge return on investment from that perspective. And then the one that I really find truly exciting for the future is 46% more retention of the acquired skills after 3 months. Because what we did in that study is not only measure the current state, but then we came back 3 months later to actually assess the same groups and look at the knowledge retention. Now, what we saw within that was one other key thing. So this drove two areas of interest. Yes, adaptation is key and being skills focused, really, really hyper focused on those skills. Secondly, nudging, finding ways to strategically remind people, because the icing on the cake in this scenario is those individuals actually had an app that nudged them based upon their engagement levels every few days, or it could be up to a week, depending upon how they performed, with tiny little bite-sized nuggets of content to keep reminding, refreshing, and driving them. And that's where we saw such a huge impact. So if you start to think about the end result here, we have saved a huge amount of time, which is fundamentally skills-based return on investment. We have also proven that we can retain people's engagement. You're getting better bang for your buck, for want of a better word. We've saved a huge amount of money in terms of cost when it comes to actually fewer failures, the repeat testing, the content consumption, all those good things that you'll be familiar with, I'm sure. But most importantly, that knowledge is retained for longer and of a higher quality. So very proud of these outcomes, and that was the critical thing that we really wanted to focus on and validate. So I've actually been a little bit speedy through that in terms of covering off that content. That's caught me slightly off guard, but you're probably all slightly relieved. But the critical thing I wanted to do here was really show, I think, two critical things. One, we shouldn't assume that the people that have stayed at the same company and come out the other end of the pandemic have the same skills. They've probably all developed in ways you didn't even realize. But secondly, that we need to therefore also give some respect to that we need to evolve the way we're learning and be very focused upon those skills. But critically, by being skills focused, the outcomes can be huge financially, as well as delivering high quality services and mitigating your risk at the same time. So some food for thought, hopefully interesting. If you would like to hear more, we'd love to show you a little demo. Do come and see us. We're on stand L55. We have lots more stories to tell. So thank you ever so much for your time today.